At 50, David Beckham breaks his silence about Brooklyn Beckham, and it becomes a family tragedy. A fictional narrative. David Beckham turned 50 on a quiet morning that surprised even himself. There was no roaring stadium, no chanting crowds, no flash of cameras chasing him down a street in London or Milan. Just the soft sound of rain tapping against the windows of their countryside home, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, and the steady, undeniable weight of time. 50. For most of the world, David Beckham at 50 was still an icon, immaculate, controlled, successful. A man who had seemingly won at everything: football, fame, marriage, fatherhood. A brand, a legend. But legends, David had learned, were often built on silence. That morning, as he sat alone at the long oak table, phone face down beside his coffee cup, he realized something that unsettled him more than aging ever could. There was one voice missing. Brooklyn's. The silence that grew too loud. It hadn't happened overnight. That was the cruel part. Silence, David discovered, never arrived like a storm. It crept in slowly, disguised as busyness, misunderstandings, and unreturned messages. At first, it was just fewer calls. Brooklyn was growing up, after all, finding his own path, living his own life. David told himself that distance was normal, even healthy. He remembered his own youth, how desperately he'd wanted to prove himself, to step out of other people's shadows. Still, a father notices patterns before he admits them. Texts became shorter. Replies came later. Family group chats were read but unanswered. Invitations were declined politely, then vaguely, then not at all. Victoria noticed it too. "He's just figuring things out," she said one night, though her voice lacked conviction. David nodded, even as something inside him tightened. Fathers are supposed to be strong, silent, reliable. They are not supposed to admit fear. And yet, the fear was there. A house full of voices, and one absence. The Beckham home was rarely quiet. There were younger children moving through the halls, laughter echoing from the kitchen, staff coming and going. Life, full and vibrant. And still, David could feel the absence like a missing note in a familiar song. Brooklyn was the first, the one who had made him a father. David still remembered holding him for the first time, hands trembling despite years of physical discipline. He had faced world-class defenders without fear, but nothing had prepared him for the fragile weight of his son. "I'll do better," he had whispered back then, not knowing exactly what that meant. Now, decades later, he wondered if he had failed without ever realizing it. Fame as a wall. People often asked David what it was like raising children in the spotlight. He used to smile and say, "You just keep things normal." But the truth was more complicated. Fame did not just open doors, it built walls. Brooklyn had grown up watched, analyzed, compared. Every interest scrutinized, every choice turned into a headline. Photography, cooking, business, none of it was ever allowed to be just a phase. David knew what pressure felt like. But he had chosen football. Brooklyn had inherited the aftermath. And inheritance, David realized too late, could be a burden. The interview he never planned to give. The invitation came unexpectedly. A respected journalist. A long-form interview. No sensationalism promised. Just reflection. 50 years of life. Lessons learned. David agreed without fully understanding why. Maybe he was tired of holding everything in. Maybe turning 50 had cracked something open. Or maybe he knew, deep down, that silence had already done enough damage. They sat across from each other in a quiet room, the air heavy with unspoken boundaries. Toward the end, the journalist asked gently, "How has fatherhood changed you?" David answered automatically at first, talking about pride, responsibility, love. Then came the follow-up. "And Brooklyn?" The name landed differently. David paused. For the first time in years, he didn't rush to fill the silence. I don't think people understand, he said slowly, voice lower now, how easy it is to lose each other, even when you love someone more than anything. The journalist didn't interrupt. I've always tried to protect my family, David continued, but sometimes protection feels like control, and sometimes children don't forgive that. The words hung in the air. That was the moment. The silence broke. A father's confession. I missed things, David said, eyes fixed on the floor. Not birthdays or holidays, I was there for those. But I missed moments where my son needed space, not guidance. Understanding, not advice. He swallowed. When you're used to being listened to, on the pitch, in business, you forget that at home, your voice isn't meant to lead. It's meant to listen. It wasn't an accusation, it wasn't blame. It was regret. I think Brooklyn felt like he had to become someone else to breathe. For a man known for control and composure, the vulnerability was startling. I don't see this as rebellion, David said quietly. I see it as pain. The aftermath. The interview spread quickly. Headlines spoke of a rift, a family tragedy, a broken bond. David hadn't intended to expose anything, but truth, once spoken, has a way of escaping its frame. Brooklyn read the article alone. He read it twice. Then he put the phone down and stared at the ceiling, memories flooding back, photographers shouting his name, expectations pressing down, conversations that turned into lectures instead of dialogues. He didn't feel anger. He felt tired. Two men, one distance. They were alike in more ways than either wanted to admit. Both stubborn, both proud, both shaped by pressure. The tragedy wasn't that they didn't love each other. It was that they loved each other without knowing how to meet in the middle anymore. David wanted to fix things. Brooklyn wanted to be seen. And neither knew how to cross the gap without losing themselves. Victoria's quiet role. Victoria had always been the bridge. She saw what David didn't. Felt what Brooklyn couldn't articulate. This isn't about winning, she told David one night. It's about letting go. David nodded, but letting go had never been his strength. On the pitch, surrender meant defeat. In fatherhood, it might mean salvation. A message unsent. On his birthday night, David typed a message to Brooklyn. He deleted it. Typed again. Deleted again. Finally, he wrote, I'm here, not as your father who knows better, just as someone who wants to understand. He stared at the screen for a long time before sending it. No reply came that night. But the message stayed delivered. And sometimes, that was enough. The true tragedy. The world called it a family tragedy because people expected drama. Shouting matches, public fallouts, irreversible damage. But the real tragedy was quieter. It was two people loving each other deeply, yet failing to speak the same emotional language. It was time passing without guarantees. It was realizing that being present isn't the same as being available. At 50, David Beckham understood something no trophy had ever taught him. You can build a legacy admired by millions and still struggle to reach the person who matters most. An open ending. There was no grand reconciliation, no cinematic reunion. Just small steps. A message acknowledged, a call unanswered, then returned days later. A conversation that avoided the past but hinted at the future. Healing, David learned, was not a moment. It was a choice, made repeatedly, without applause. And for the first time in his life, David Beckham was willing to wait, without pushing, without directing, without demanding. Because some victories aren't about scoring. They're about staying in the game long enough for love to find its way back.